Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. We're on part 2 of our story, so if you haven't heard part 1, I suggest you click on it. Let's continue with our story. Suffice to say, I was hoping that the old colonial abandoned house would be bulldozed one day, but it was not to be. It was about a year and a half later. I noticed a sold sign outside the house, and then there was a team of builders on the property, working assiduously on the project, and 2 years later, a couple with a 4-year-old daughter had moved into the house. They were described as a genuinely warm, friendly couple. I suppose I should have popped around as a friendly, dutiful neighbour that lived further down the road, but I couldn't do it. You see, for me, despite the improved renovations to the property, it remained in my mind forever tainted and soiled by the iniquitous practices that I'd seen taking place there. I couldn't forget it. To think that those Satan worshippers had nearly sacrificed my dog Casper to Lucifer. It was something that grieved me greatly. I just didn't want to go anywhere near the hauntingly bodeful place. And despite the fact that the property now looked amazing, with mowed lawns, trimmed hedges, borders filled with pretty flowers, walls painted in a gleaming white, a grey slate roof, and brand new fixtures and fittings for the windows, I wondered privately to myself if the owners had any idea about what had happened there. Had they observed the carved pentagram in the floor, the ominous bloodstains, the black candle wax, the ugly graffiti praising Lucifer, the upside-down crosses? Could it be that the macabre evidence of what had transpired in the house, being clandestinely expunged in some way? I mean, if I was to see a property like that, I'd run a mile. My husband emphatically believed that all the evidence of the Satan worshippers would have been surreptitiously removed, with a quick coat of paint and some floor sanding, by a savvy estate agent, who would have known that such a gruesome exhibit would almost certainly turn off potential buyers. I discerned that my husband was possibly right. The charmingly evocative bookshop where I worked in town had a coffee shop attached to it, so you could buy a book and read it in the coffee shop, or you could browse through the books and enjoy a coffee, a cake, or even a slight savoury snack for lunch. The sumptuously cosy setup appeared to attract people like bees to a honeypot, offering wistful, nostalgic feelings of comfort for those that enjoy the rich, romantic, sentimental pleasure of stories. We would find the book sales increased exponentially in the store, as people desiring a coffee would be tempted to just look through the books, and then they would leave with a book in their hands that they had probably never intended to buy in the first place, as in passing they'd just fancied a cappuccino or a latte. Let's just say there is something about the lure of books and coffee that attracts people to the store. It was a wonderful bookshop. There were shelves piled high with a magnificent selection of books, from fiction to non-fiction, to the most picturesque poetic books that would be proud to grace any coffee table in your home, with large pages of colourful photographs on topics to inspire your interest and intrigue. I've always loved working in bookshops, as I'm a passionate reader myself. It was a memorable, prepossessing day, as after the long drawn-out winter months, you could sense a definite shift in the mood of the people in town, as the implacable spring sunshine was zealously bursting through the cobalt blue sky, and the whimsical planters on the street were now filled with pink, red, coral and white-coloured geraniums that tumbled gracefully over the sides of the pots, covered in a plethora of blossoms. The once barren leaves of the deciduous trees had sprouted new life. They were ablaze with the first shoots of their verdant foliage. I observed a pretty young lady on the pavement. She was wearing a bright yellow cotton sundress, with white daisies on it, with shoestring straps and a white belt around her narrow waist, and a yellow band over her long dark hair. She stopped and looked into the bookshop, pressing her face against the window to look through the glass, so that her nose smudged the pane. She cautiously opened the door and walked into the shop. The inside bell tingled. She was holding a cute little girl's hand with blonde curls, a heart-shaped face, and very inquiring, spirited blue eyes. I thought this little girl's mother was pretty, with a demure reticence about her, which contradicted the bright colour she was wearing. The type of person that gladly would shrink into the shadows at a social event, a party, or a book club. The little girl was trying to drag her mother over to the kiddies section. "Mummy, look, there are lots of stories over there. Look, can we get the Curious Garden and the Lion and the Mouse, please? Please, Mummy, I want these books." The woman glanced up at me briefly. Her face became white. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. For a moment she stared at me, and sensing she was being rude, she quickly looked away. But when she thought I wasn't looking, she stared at me again. She then moved towards the children's books, with her mind far away from Kiddy's books. But she put up a good pretense and kept giving me sideways glances, while sifting through the books with her child. I had one question on my mind. Why is this woman staring at me? Merildev's story. I wasn't happy that my impetuous, unrepressed husband had bought an old abandoned house. But this was the kind of thing Keith would do. Why was I surprised? I mean, my capricious husband was impulsive, rash, and instinctive at the very best of times. And he sensed a house going for such a good price was not to be sneezed at. And as we could bring the old colonial house back to speed with some tender loving care, why not? My husband was a visionary who could see the potential in anything that looked like it had long since lost its brilliant shine, gloss and lustre. My husband had a passion for all things old that had seen better days and looked woefully sorry for itself. One of his passions was antiques. He loved to find treasure in the most unlikely, obscure of places. On one garage sale he frequented, he found a piece of artwork done by a famous artist. Of course, he didn't know that at the time, but under all the goo and dust, it looked negligible, insignificant, run-of-the-mill, until the painting was finally restored, and a collector bought it from my husband at a price that simply changed our lives from a financial perspective, and for that I was ever grateful to him. This colonial house had been sitting nestled on this piece of land, about 50 feet away from the road, abandoned and forsaken, for about 4 or 5 years, I think. It was surrounded by a tall thicket of trees on every side. At one time it looked like it was an imposing building, but now it looked as if it was almost sinking in an ocean of its own melancholia, as it was being cruelly strangled by the asphyxiating plant life, attacked fiercely by bad weather that had encouraged mildew and mould to grow exponentially around the house, along with damp raining conditions to encourage warping, sagging and rotting. Then there had been an abundance of animal life visiting the house, from rats, mice, spiders to moths. It would seem the owners had fled to New York, but finally they had remembered the run-down, dilapidated building that had once been their home and put it on the market, possibly realizing that there was some money to be made on the property. How I wished they hadn't. By all accounts, they were terribly lucky that the house didn't have to be bulldozed, as against all the odds, the high-quality roofing had remained intact, which had been the house's one saving grace. I'll never forget the first time I saw that house. It gave me the creeps. It looked sad and dejected, as angry variegated creeper had wound itself around the house like an anaconda squeezing the life out of its prey. Let's just say the house was suffocated by this jutting, invasive, tenacious plant, as it rudely wormed its way through the windows and even the chimneys, where it had been growing through the fireplaces and straddling the walls so voraciously. My husband had looked at me like a little boy who discovered a treasure trove of candy and asked me, "Well, what do you think?" He was grinning from ear to ear, his eyes sparkling brightly. I didn't want to crush my husband's enthusiasm, but I hated this house. Everything about it I loathed. I don't like it, I admitted. The place, well, it feels, I'm not sure what the word is. Creepy, sinister, uncongenial, I suppose.
Of course, that's how you feel about it, sweetheart. Remember when I brought that painting from the yard sale? You took one look at it and pooh-poohed it. You said it belonged in the trash, but it was worth a fortune when it was cleaned up. That painting has changed our lives, you've got to admit it. We would never ever be considering buying a house with this kind of potential without that injection of cash in our lives, would we?
No, I admit we wouldn't, and that is true. But why is it, when you want to get your way, Keith, you keep returning me back to that old painting? It's like you're saying, I can see the potential of something that you can't.
But it's true, sweetheart. I can. You're looking at the knee-high overgrown grass in the yard, the thick congealed dust cloaking everything, the peeling paint, the cracks in the walls, the dilapidated sagging state of the building, the walls hemorrhaging rust, the cobwebs gracing every available corner, and the plethora of rat droppings scattered everywhere. Naturally, it's not a pretty picture on the surface. Try and expand your vision, sweetheart. Think about the renovations that would restore this place. Mowed grass, a pretty front yard. Then you will see what this place could potentially become. It's oozing so much promise, but you are seeing it as a lost, hopeless cause, not worth investing in. And that is what I call appallingly short-sighted.
Don't you think it's odd that the floor in the main lounge has been sanded down and that some of the walls have been painted over? I mean, it's a little like painting a small area on a rusty tin can. I mean, who does that? And why? What are they hiding from us?
Oh, I spoke to the estate agent about that, sweetheart. It would seem the owner discovered the place had been taken over by squatters. There was a huge amount of candle wax all over the floor. It was a huge mess. It's a miracle the place did not burn down, I gather. And there was offensive graffiti on the walls as well, which the owner decided to paint over. He didn't want to put off potential buyers.
Are you kidding me? If he didn't want to put off potential buyers, he might as well have renovated the place himself. I mean, I'm sorry, but the peeling paint and the invasive creeper that has decided to strangle every wall of this house is far more offensive than a bit of graffiti. I don't know what you see in this place. I really don't, Keith. It gives me the heebie-jeebies.
If I may remind you, that's exactly what you said to me about the painting.
Even though I tried to fight my corner as hard as I could, reminding my husband that we had a 3-year-old daughter to consider, and renovations would be rather destructive for an impressionable little girl, my husband could not be otherwise persuaded to change his mind. Let's just say Keith had been head of the debating team at school, and he persuasively won his debates with an adept silvery tongue that always knew the right thing to say, to cast reasonable doubt on to something or to throw a spanner into the works. So invariably he always won, even the most unlikely of arguments. Everyone said he was in the wrong profession, and he was. He'd have been a great criminal lawyer for the defence, casting enough doubt on the prosecution witnesses in order to get the guilty party off. Let's just say his ability to win an argument was masterful. I'd learnt to quit while I was ahead a long time ago. I knew it was fruitless arguing with my husband, as when he had his heart set on something, wild horses would not tear him away from his goal. Besides, arguing with him was exhausting. I would feel like one of those frazzled mothers at the grocery store, when your kid is pestering you for sweets. Please, Mummy, please can I have the candy? Please, please, please. Until eventually the poor woman is worn down, so she gives in to her daughter's demands. Frankly, she's too tired to put her foot down. In truth, arguments with my husband would make me feel just like that, or like a goldfish thrown out of a tank of water, struggling to draw breath. I knew I'd be banging my head against a brick wall if I put up any resistance, so I crumbled, like a demolished building collapsing to the ground, as I surrendered to his will. In truth, I was slowly warming to the idea of the house, as my husband had adeptly persuaded me that it was a great investment, and I knew more often than not he was usually right about most things. The problem was I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that seemed to seep through my thoughts, rather like the dirty drain water through a crack in the walls, that something didn't actually feel right about the place. But whatever it was, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Before long there were builders working on the property, but one day my husband returned home with an ashen face, saying 2 builders had quit the job and weren't coming back. "But why?" I asked, looking appalled. My husband ran his hand through his buoyant blonde curls that always made him look younger than his years. and softened the contours of his masculine jawline. For a moment he didn't answer me, and then he said gingerly,
"One of the men claimed something pushed him down the staircase and growled at him. He actually wet his pants, he was so terrified, and ran from the house. He's refusing to continue to work for us. And the other man claimed someone kicked him in the back, and when he turned around, nothing was there. But he sensed something foreboding was watching him."
"Oh my God! You don't think the house is haunted, do you?"
"Don't be ridiculous. Maybe the men were out of sorts, seeing things that weren't there. There's always a plausible explanation for things."
I wasn't convinced by my husband's reasoning, but after that inauspicious hair-raising incident, the builders no longer reported any strange activity in our home, which made me reasonably reassured that nothing untoward was going on in the property, and that the two builders that initially abandoned the project had got ants in their pants about absolutely nothing. I will admit, when we moved into the colonial house, once it was restored, it looked incredible. I felt as if I had time-travelled to another place, another era in our rich, vibrant history, for the house was so traditional in every regard, proudly wallowing in its heritage, like a reticent young girl suddenly coming out of her reserve that had held her back for so long. It was almost as if the newly revitalised house began to fully appreciate that she was no longer a lost cause, as she had been brought back from her debilitating, emaciated state to her full glory. Why had I ever doubted my husband's ability to see the potential in something most people would deem as a fruitless project with little hope of a successful outcome? How wrong I was. Suffice to say, much like the painting congealed by dust that my husband had painstakingly restored, the sagging, dilapidated house that appeared to be shrinking from age, crumbling under the weathering of time, with wrinkling skin decaying on its heavy foundations, and with sunken, sorrowful hollows for windows, and ugly, invasive liver spots mottling the walls, not to mention out-of-control wispy hair, seen in the variegated ivy that had sprouted through every orifice like out-of-control, unwanted facial hair. By all accounts, the makeover of the property had thrust a brand new building from yesteryear into our time space, so that it shone like a brand new pin. The white walls gleamed against the perfectly manicured verdant lawns of the home, and the neat little box hedges framed the sandstone walkway to the front door. It all looked so perfect. I took in a deep breath as my eyes travelled over every nook and cranny, as I drank in every inch of the house with a fervent appreciation, like savouring a glass of full-bodied wine, and noting all the subtle woody and fruity notes.
"What do you think?"
my husband had asked me, smiling proudly with a "I told you so" look on his face. "I think it's beautiful," I said, "really, really beautiful." I gave him a huge hug. "I should have never doubted you for a moment. You win, Keith. You were right about this place. It's a knockout. I can't believe I was so blindsighted."
"You and most of the population," my husband teased. "Most people judge a book by its cover. It's human nature. You see it all the time. I was watching an America's Got Talent show recently. There was this hefty 500-pound man. He gets onto the stage with legs so big they stick together, and his face buried beneath mounds of flesh. You could see the people sniggering in the audience when he was asked if he would like to become a great singer. Nobody believed for a moment that someone who looked like him could possibly sing. But when he opened his mouth, the audience gasped. They stood up and cheered and clapped. Let's just say he sung like Pavarotti, and everyone in that audience had egg on their face. Remind me to never overlook a thing you say." We recruited an interior designer to help us furnish the house with an integrity that was complementary to the time, but allowing modern conveniences to blend in harmoniously with the look, so that a state-of-the-art kitchen didn't look out of place in our home. It was a month after we'd moved in that I started to notice strange things happening around our house. At first they were so ambiguous, so obscure, I didn't give them much credence, and put it down to a new but old house that is inclined to make noises. Let's just say at night I'd hear what sounded like banging pipes, boots walking up steps,
And then there were whispers and the feeling of being watched all the time. I thought I was imagining things. Sometimes in my peripheral vision, I would swear I could see a dark shadow bolting quickly past me, but I would turn around and nothing was there. My daughter Adele was a demanding child. As a first-time stay-at-home mother, I was fatigued. I thought my tiredness was catching up with me, and I was seeing and hearing things that weren't actually there. One day as I'm washing dishes in the sink, I see my daughter Adele on the swing set, which we deliberately placed under the oak tree, overlooking the kitchen, so that while I'm cleaning, baking or cooking, I can keep my beady eyes on her all the time. I stopped washing the dishes as I see my daughter swinging gently, but she's talking, laughing and giggling, as if someone is there with her, but I don't see anyone. I decide she must have an imaginary friend. I feel racked with guilt, as I realise that Adele would love a baby brother or sister for company. But despite our very best efforts, I failed to get pregnant. Maybe some things are just not meant to be. When my daughter comes back into the house, I decide to quiz her on whom she'd been talking to at the swings. Maybe tease her about it. So who were you talking to out there by the swings? I was talking to Snow, says my daughter. My blood runs cold when she says this. You see, Snow was my mother's name. Her real name was Sarah Natalia Olsen. And so when she was young, people would call her Snow. And the name just stuck. But my mother had died long before Adele was even born, from a very bad viral pneumonia. And Adele had no idea her name was Snow. What did Snow have to say? I asked my daughter. She says she's looking after us because of the bad thing. What bad thing? I ask. The smoke wolf, says my daughter. But she says she's going to keep him away so he can't hurt us. At this, I'm not exactly sure what to think. Snow says, Mummy, you got a necklace that you're going to give me one day to wear when I'm a big, big girl. She says she wore it when she was a big girl, and you wore it too. When my daughter says this, I'm astounded. You see, not even my husband Keith knows about a diamond pendant that my mother gave me on my 21st birthday, which is to be given to my daughter on her 21st birthday. It was a pendant my mother had given her mother on her 21st birthday, and it was a family tradition that no one knew about except myself. I want you to look at these photographs, I say to my daughter, showing her some pictures that include my mother. But she doesn't recognise them until I bring out an album of my mother as a young 30-year-old woman. That's Snow. That's Snow over there, she says, pointing to the picture of a young woman smiling warmly in the camera, holding a little girl's hand, and that little girl is me. One evening when my husband was out of town for a few nights, the activity in our house stepped up a notch, possibly because he was away. I was lying in my bed in the middle of the night to hear what I can only describe as heavy combat boots walking across the landing and stopping at my door. For a while, nothing happens, but I'm holding my breath as I sit up in bed, clinging to my bed sheets tightly. There's someone outside my bedroom. Someone's broken into my house. What am I going to do? I'm frozen to the spot, unable to react, as I've been flung almost aggressively out of a deep but groggy, sleepy state into my current reality, with a hostile, rude awakening. I am desperately trying to adjust to what is transpiring around me, but I feel disorientated and confused. Surely this is a dream. Of course it is. In any moment I'll be woken up. I'll be laughing at myself for being so ridiculously silly, with an infantile, overactive imagination. My heart sinks like a heavy stone, dropping to the depths of the ocean. You see, I know that this is no dream. I'm wide awake, and this is rarely happening, and I honestly don't know how to react or what to do. It's like my brain is firing incorrectly on all its cylinders and just hopelessly sinking into the horrors of the moment, like a Portuguese man of war that is immobilized after the waves spit the opaque lump of jelly out onto the beach sand, and it squats on the shore like a big, useless, gelatinous glob. I feel like that lump of jello, held hostage by an insufferable fear. The door of my bedroom squeaks open on its own accord, while a blustering Arctic wind blows into my room, snatching the warmth away with a guzzling hunger, and causing the curtains that grace my windows to flap like the large sails on a boat. By now, I'm petrified. I want to scream. I want to say something. I want to cry out. But nothing comes out of my dry throat. The ominous footsteps walk through the room, slowly, deliberately, as if whatever it is that is moving towards me wants to scare the living hell out of me. And it's succeeding. I'm sweating profusely. The water dribbles down my back and forehead like raindrops. I shouldn't be sweating in a room that is so cold. The footsteps move up and down around my bed. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Who are you? What do you want? I say. The next thing I know is that I hear this terrible, disembodied, deep, guttural growl that is so discomposing. It literally terrifies the life out of me. It is the most ear-piercing growl that I have ever heard, that becomes a roar. And the next thing I know is that my bed begins to shake so violently and just levitates from the floor up to the ceiling. And then it drops to the ground with a loud thud. And then whatever it was that tormented me finally vanishes. I'm trembling so much, and then I get a whiff of my mother's perfume, with its distinctive floral notes that she always wore when she was alive. It's like in a second the darkness has lifted, flooded by the light of my mother's warm, congenial presence. And it's in this serene, calm atmosphere and energy that I finally fall into a deep sleep. And in my dream state, I keep seeing this woman's face. Now, I've never seen her before a day in my life. She's an attractive woman with long dark hair and auburn highlights, a long Irish face, and arresting green eyes that you don't forget in a hurry. For some reason, the prominence of the woman in my dream is so significant that even after the chaos of the night's outer-worldly activity, I remember that dream with an indelible, ineffaceable recall. The following morning, I wake up at about 8 o'clock, rather bewildered that my daughter Adele hadn't woken me up at the crack of dawn like she normally does. She usually gatecrashes my bed, bringing along with her an army of dolls and teddies to sleep with me and my husband. I decided she must have slept in for once in her life, and as a mother, any free time you get is a God-given gift that you snatch gratefully. The bedroom is incredibly quiet, without my husband's presence. I so wish he wasn't away for a few days, just when I need him the most. Soft shafts of morning light twinkle through the room, and that's when the full horrors of the previous night come flooding back to me, and I know that there is something ungodly in our house. This is compounded moments later, when I check on my daughter Adele. I find her lying fast asleep on her closet floor, surrounded by a heaped jumble of her own clothes. Why on earth is she sleeping in her closet? "Sweetheart," I say, sitting down on my knees and picking her up from the floor, cradling her in my arms, rocking her reassuringly. "What are you doing sleeping on the floor of the closet? Why aren't you in your bed?" "I saw him, Mummy. I saw the horrible smoky wolf that Snow told me about. The bad thing. He came into my room last night with the wind. He growled at me. But Snow came and got rid of him for me, but I was scared he was going to come back. So I hid in the closet." "Why didn't you scream or call me to help you, sweetheart?" "'Cause I lost my voice, Mummy, and I couldn't run 'cause my legs wouldn't move, and I wet myself." "Never you mind about that, sweetheart. We're going to sort the problem out now for you." I wasted no time going online to appeal to anyone in our area dealing with the paranormal who might be able to help me with my problem. My note read, "Dear Sir or Madam, I'm in urgent need of your help. I believe there's a demonic entity in my home. Please get back to me as soon as you can." I ventured into town and decided to look into the bookshop, and that's when I saw the woman that I'd seen in my dreams. I know she noticed I kept looking at her. Eventually she comes over to the children's section and asks me if she can help me. Back to Lorna. I can see the woman in the bookshop staring at me, looking away and staring at me again. She's barely looking at the children's books, so I walk over to her with a warm smile and ask if I may help her. "Yes, actually you can, although I don't know how, because this is going to sound exceedingly odd, but your face came into my dreams last night. I've never met you before. I've only just moved into the area, so I got a real shock when I saw you in the bookshop. I can't think what my dream could mean. You see, normally my dreams are so vague. I barely remember anything. But your face came into my dream so vividly. I'm sorry if I was staring at you just now, but I can't fathom what's actually going on. Where have you moved? I asked curiously. I've moved to the Green Acres. I don't know if you know it. It's an old colonial house. It was in a bad state of repair, but me and my husband fixed it up. I know the place. I drive past your house every day. I live further up the road. You've done an amazing job on the place, I must say. It doesn't bother you then? You're obviously not superstitious. The woman furrows her forehead. What doesn't bother me? She asks. Well, the pentagram, the black candle wax, the graffiti on the wall. I think the place was used by Satan worshippers. What? Says Meredith, covering her fingers over her mouth in shock. That explains an awful lot. When we bought the house, part of the walls were painted over, and the living room floor was sanded down. We had no idea there was anything demonic going on in the house, but now I suppose it explains all the strange activity we've been getting. I suppose that makes sense. The pentagram and graffiti were possibly covered up. Otherwise it could put off potential buyers. What's this about strange activity? What's been going on in your property? When Meredith tells me what's been going on, I realise those Satan worshippers I'd encountered that inauspicious night must have invited a demon into her house. So I tell her to move in with me, and her daughter as well, for a couple of days. I don't believe it's safe for her to stay in her home alone, especially with her husband not being there, until we get in someone who knows what they're doing to clear away that negative energy. I couldn't possibly impose on you, said Meredith. I don't even know you. Of course you can. You can't possibly stay in that home alone, especially after what happened to you. It was 2 days later we were able to get a psychic and a priest around to the house. We made absolutely certain that Adele was staying with my husband at home. The psychic was a middle-aged woman with brown hair and steely grey eyes called Hilda. The priest, a man in his 60s, with a full head of thick grey hair. He was called Father Paul, a very serious, willowy man, with brown frightened eyes, who kept saying, I feel a great evil in this house, a great, great evil. The poor man was trembling. I noticed he was clutching the cross around his neck so tightly, as if hanging on to it for dear life, for some kind of reassurance. Not for a moment did his mouth stop moving, as he kept praying the prayer of St. Christopher, and in one hand he was carrying the largest bottle of holy water that I've ever seen. It was as if he'd come to Meredith's home armed with precautions. I was to learn he had been thrown around by a demonic entity once, and it had taken him all his nerve and courage to come around to Meredith's house. But despite his great reservations and misgivings, he had still agreed to come. Hilda kept encouraging him, telling him to stand on his faith, and all would be well. I'm sure it won't be as bad as last time, Father Paul, she kept saying. I remember thinking, if the priest is so nervous, how the hell can me and Meredith be expected to hold it together? And what can we expect to happen in this house clearing? Hilda became very stoic and absorbed as she made her way around the house, climbing stairs, visiting different rooms, while the priest followed behind her. I watched them walking around, and their expressions were earnestly sombre. I noticed Hilda standing in the area for a long time, where the devil worshippers had performed their blood sacrifices, and where the pentagram was carved on the floor. I could see her closing her eyes tightly. I'm afraid you have a demon in your home. It's gaining strength, she told us. He was brought into this house recently, after a sacrificial offering of some kind presented to Lucifer. About 3 years ago, I think. I can see an image of a pentagram on the floor, and I see a blood sacrifice of some kind being offered up to Lucifer. It would have been a lot worse if someone very powerful, with a very powerful energy, hadn't put a stop to this sacrifice, as more demons were going to be invited into your reality, into this very house. But it inadvertently was stopped by this powerful angelic intervention of some kind that scared the Satan worshippers away. The trouble is the demon in this house was conjured up before the activity was stopped, and is dangerous. But you've had help from the other side, I see. A woman called Snow, who's been trying to keep the evil at bay. She tells me she was your mother, Meredith, and Adele's grandmother. Is that right?" "That's right," said Meredith. "My daughter has been seeing Snow quite regularly." "Your grandmother Snow has tried to protect you from this dark entity in the house. A shape-shifting demon, with an intense hatred. This demon would be able to take on human form when the need arises, and even emulates human voices. But this demon is not human, nor has it ever existed on the earth plane. He was invited into our reality. I see him as having a face of a wolf, but he's refusing to give me his name. There's a portal in this house that opens for a few minutes every night, and anything from beyond the veil could drift into our reality, which presents a grave problem. So we need to close that portal, and we need to bless this house and drive that demon out. It's very significant you hold it together. I know it's not easy, but you don't want to allow fear to occupy your thoughts as we do this cleansing, because demons feed off fear. Is everyone ready for the cleansing?" We all nod, while the psychic and the father repeat the prayer of St. Michael, and we're given the prayer to read out loud, and we pray it loudly throughout the house in every single room. I tried desperately not to feel any fear, but it was difficult to be strong when I had this profound sense that something dreadful would happen. My heart thundered in my chest, and I had cold chills racing down my spine. We ambled through every room in the house, avoiding the living room, where I'd personally seen the devil worshippers myself on that inauspicious night. If it hadn't been for that Bigfoot scaring them all away, we could be dealing with a greater evil in this home, and who knows how many more demons may have been conjured up and called up into our time-space. The pretentious thought left my blood curdling. The psychic intended to cleanse the living room last. Initially, nothing happened at all. It was as if we were going through the motions, chanting prayers for no reason at all. I almost felt silly, but all the while I felt as if we were being watched by menacing eyes, but we saw absolutely nothing. I knew the priest was feeling the dark energy because he never stopped trembling, not even for a moment. But I admired his audacious courage, because despite his dreadful fear, he refused to give up fighting this demonic stronghold. Hilda was burning sage, which she was smoking in all the corners, while white vapours of whispering smoke seemed to float through the air and physically lighten the energy, while the priest continued to sprinkle holy water in each room. Everything remained benign until we entered the living room, and that was when everything began to change. In truth, when we entered the living room, it was like we'd entered another realm, another reality, another space. The temperature was so fiercely cold, we were breathing out white mist. My fingers felt like blocks of ice, and I was shivering, while the curtains in the room were thrashing around frantically like large sails on a boat being punnelled against a heavy, feisty wind. I know it sounds crazy, but it was almost like the room was rocking like a boat, and I was feeling disorientated and nauseous from the swaying effects, almost as if I was getting seasickness. It truly felt as if we were out on the ocean. "This is a trick," says Hilda, "to make you lose focus. Keep praying. Don't be distracted." Suddenly we hear a woman's voice saying, "Meredith, please stop this. Don't do this." Meredith gasps. "Oh my word, that's my mother's voice. That's Snow." "No, it's not," said Hilda. "It's the demon pretending to be your mother." I kid you not, we began to hear voices of our deceased loved ones we had known in life, telling us to stop the ceremony, to stop it at once. The voices even said it in unison. "Stop this! Stop this! Stop this at once!" But we continued knowing that the demon was using the voices of our loved ones as a manipulative tactic to deceive us. Finally, when the demon was cornered, he began to growl, and the ear-piercing noise was unlike anything I've ever heard before. Low and guttural. I just wanted to run away. But even the pastor, who was wobbling like a rocking chair, remained resolutely determined to continue with the cleansing. So I tried my level best to hold it together. But the dark energy in the room was so invasive, and there was a putrid, sulphurous smell that was violently obnoxious, that smelt like death and decay. I wanted to gag and throw up, but I managed to maintain my composure. We prayed the prayer of St. Michael with even greater conviction, our words spoken with a pronounced determination. In a trice we see this black smoke whirling around and around and around, and in this black smoke we see the face of a wolf glaring at us with blazing red eyes. The tenebrous smoke spiraled into a thick mass, filtering through the window, and we saw it leaving Meraldus' house until it had gone, and the house began to feel light and airy. The heaviness had lifted, and we hugged each other with such relief. "See, I told you," said Hilda to Pastor Paul. "It wasn't as bad as last time," which left me wondering what poor Pastor Paul had been through on a previous house cleansing, and I didn't want to know, so I didn't ask. Let's just say years have passed, and Meraldus and I have become the very best of friends. I gather little Adele saw Snow for one last time, who told her she was leaving, as everything was safe now, and the portal had been closed. I no longer feel intimidated by Meraldus' home anymore, as the demonic activity has never returned, so they didn't have to sell their house, thank goodness. I've not seen the Bigfoot I encountered, who was clearly the powerful angelic being the psychic was talking about. Here's hoping he might cross my path again one day, but hopefully in more convivial circumstances. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.